Hello friends and welcome to the Bearded Fool Gaming. I can't believe it, my webcam is actually working. I thought this thing had went totally out, but after restarting my computer about 8 times yesterday, it looks like it is working for the moment, so we'll go with it. If it freezes up, so be it. So we don't have a lot of time today, so I'm going to try to skim through these last few spoilers here. Don't have too many to go through. As always, I give a more of a limited perspective, and I'm looking forward to finishing up here. Aether Revolt's been really cool. This limited format looks really cool. And Standard is going to be totally different now that there's no Copter. You know, if you didn't see the announcements, Copter, Emrakul, and Reflector Mage are banned. Crazy, I know, but hey, let's go ahead and get this started. As always, chats are open. So now here we have Gremlin Infestation. This is an aura enchantment for 3 and a red, and you enchant an artifact. At the end of your turn, that deals, or Gremlin Infestation itself deals 2 damage to that artifact's controller. And then, if that artifact is put into a graveyard, you get a 2/2 Gremlin. So this card seems a little bad at first. It's an aura that requires your opponent to have an artifact. If they get rid of the aura itself, nothing happens. And if they get rid of the artifact, you get a 2/2 Gremlin. So, if this essentially becomes 4 mana, get a 2/2, deal 2 damage, I mean, that's not the worst thing in the world. But the best case scenario I feel for this is putting it on something that is valuable to them. But in that case, wouldn't it just be better to destroy it? I'm not sure this card is very good or that it really has a place. I'm not saying it's the worst card I've ever seen, but it's definitely one of the weaker cards we've seen in Aether Revolt. You know, I mean, it can win games theoretically, but just there's so many ways to sack artifacts and things like that. It just doesn't seem like it's going to be that strong. Next up, we have Energized Rampage. This is a instant for 1 in the red. You can either give a creature +4/+0 and trample, or 2 target creatures +2/+0 and trample. So, regardless, you're getting 4 power and trample on either 1 or 2 creatures. So, this seems pretty decent. It's disappointing that it doesn't give any toughness boost, but the fact that you can give 2 things trample is pretty relevant for just a 2 mana combat trick. I think this card is pretty decent, you know, just to slip through those surprise wins or to really, you know, change the turn of a battle and just come out ahead. You're probably not going to save your own creatures with it, but you're definitely going to take theirs down, and if it becomes, you know, 1 in the red, destroy 2 of your opponent's creatures, that's definitely pretty awesome. It's somewhat versatile, not as much as some of the other that we've seen in this little cycle here, but I don't think this is bad. There's probably better combat tricks out there, so we'll see what happens. Overall, this is a good card, but there might be better things to play in its place. Next up is Lathnu Sellback. This is simply a 5/4 for 5. It does have that magical toughness of 4, and it does have 5 power, which is pretty relevant. Most of the other 5 drops are 4 or less power. So he fits that, you know, curve potentially. He's a decent attacker, moderately sized. But, you know, he's nothing special. He's simply a beefy lizard. So, if you need a curve topper and don't have anything else, you can play him if you have to. Next up, we have Precise Strike. This is an instant for 1 red, and it gives a creature +1/+0 and first strike until end of turn. So now this is an example of one of those better combat tricks that I was referencing. It may not give as much of a boost, and it can't be used to really finish off your opponents as much, but this is going to save your creature with first strike and potentially remove your opponents. So this seems like a pretty solid one. It's not amazing by any means. You know, I think that, again, there are still better, you know, surprise factors and things like that out there. I don't have any problem with playing this maybe as a one-of in a creature-heavy deck or something like that, but again, you know, it's nothing that's going to blow my mind or anything. It's something to keep in mind, though, whenever you're at it, especially the pre-release, is that that is an option. If they have 1 red open, there's quite a few different things they could be trying to do with that, and first strike is one of them, so it's always good to keep that in mind. Next up is Reckless Racer. This is a 2/3 first strike for 3, and whenever it becomes tapped, you rummage. So 2/3 for 3 is run-of-the-mill, nothing special. First strike is really good, and the rummaging ability is decent. I don't think this is the best card in this cycle of, you know, when it becomes tapped, you do stuff. But I do think that he's a solid card. The first strike is definitely relevant. First strike's pretty good. You know, he's going to get through all those Thopters and all those servos and things like that. Obviously, if he was a 3-2, I would rate him much higher. But as is, I don't have a problem with this. He's great as a 3-drop in your curve, and he just does a lot that you want him to do. He's also a pilot, so that's always pretty cool too. Next up, we have Scrapper Champion. This is a 2-2 for 4, that is 3 in a red, and it's a double strike. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you get 2 energy, and whenever it attacks, you can pay 2 energy to put a +1 counter on Scrapper. So now this card seems really, really good to me. A 2-2 for 4 is bad, obviously, but a 2-2 double strike for 4, that's already awesome. You can just don't give me any other abilities, I'll play that. Plus the ability to make energy, which is already good in red, plus the ability to just grow this at least to a 3-3, and then potentially higher if you have an energy deck. I mean, this just seems like this is going to get out of hand extremely fast, and I really like this card, actually. This is probably one of the better uncommons in my opinion. You know, you can trade up with a 4-4 or a 6-6 potentially, and just so many things that can happen with this guy. So, double strike's a super powerful ability. You know, combine this with that 4-power combat trick or something, man, there's just so many implications here. So, Scrapper Champion definitely seems like a valuable card that's going to be high pick and high playability for sure. Next up is Wrangle. This is a sorcery for 1 of the red. You gain control of target creature with power 4 or less. Untaps, gain haste, all that. So there's quite a few hijack abilities in here. This one only hits creatures, and they can only be little creatures, so it's the justification for that, I suppose, is the lower mana cost of 1 in the red. Abilities like this are generally kind of mediocre, and this one's no exception. Now, I do think it's cool if you combine it with the red expertise and take 2 of your opponent's creatures. That seems like that would be pretty fun. But overall, you know, I don't have a problem playing this card, but it's probably better relegated to the sideboard, you know, to just get through those really, really cloggy matchups and things like that. The fact that it does only gather small creatures is also very relevant. So, Wrangle's not the worst thing in the world, but it's not something that I really want to play. Next up, we have Finn Hauler. This is a 5-5 for 7, but it does have Improvise, and it can't be blocked by artifact creatures. So a 5-5 for 7 is eh. Now, if you can drop this as a 5-5 for 5, that's pretty good, and anything below that is just value at that point. He can't be blocked by artifact creatures. That means no Gear Hulks getting in his way, no Thopters, no Servos, and there's a lot of creatures that he's going to get through, so that's pretty relevant for a big body like this to have built-in evasion like that. You know, this is definitely a curved topper. You're definitely going to want to have it in a deck that's going to be able to improvise it out, because that's when it's going to shine. But overall, you know, it's nothing special, but I definitely could see this being playable. Next up, we have Foundry Hornet. This is a 2-3 for 4 with flying, and whenever it enters the battlefield, if you have a creature with a +1 counter, then all of your opponent's creatures get -1/-1. This is kind of a weird card, and it obviously really only fits into the +1 counter deck in black, which is already kind of wonky to get going. A 2-3 flyer for 4 is not the worst. You know, that's playable. But if you are able, you know, wipe your opponent's servos out, Thopters out, you know, set you up for a more favorable attack, there's definitely some options there. You know, if this had something like Flash or something, it'd be a lot better. But I don't see this being bad. You know, there's no reason not to play it if you have it. I'm not super impressed with it, but it seems good. I also like that it's a Hornet. You know, I'm a sucker for bees, and those wings are beautiful. So, Foundry Hornet is something that I would probably play if I was in black, but it's not going to pull me that way by any means. Next up is Welder Tomtom. This is a 2-1 for 2. That's already decent. And its ability is to pay 4, deal 1 damage to each opponent. Obviously better than 2-headed giant already, but not the worst thing I've ever seen. It does allow you to, you know, have that war of attrition. You know, you will win with this eventually if you're in a completely clogged board, but it is expensive. You know, 4 mana is a lot to sink in for just 1 damage. I don't think there's a reason not to play this guy unless you just have something better, obviously. A 2-1 for 2 it's almost a bear, and just to have that ability to finish off opponents. If it hit creatures, I would value this a lot higher, but only hitting opponents does limit it there, so nothing to write home about, but it's something there if you really need to fill out that 2-drop slot. Next up is 4th Bridge Prowler. This is a 1/1 for 1, another 1-drop, quite a few of those in this set. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you just give a creature -1/-1. So it seems pretty solid. It's a 1-drop, that's always nice, and it may knock off a servo or something, give you a little bit of an advantage there or something. Maybe post-combat you play it to kill off something big. I don't have any complaints here. It's a solid card. It can be a removal spell, and again, there's no real reason not to play this guy. 1-drops are always decent, and with the ability to be a relevant drop later game, makes it go up in value even more. Next up is Watchful Automaton. This is a 2/2 for 3, and its ability is to pay 2 and a blue, and you scry 1. Again, this is a solid card. 2/2 for 3 is mediocre, but the ability to just get that scry, as many scries as you want, as long as you got the mana for it, seems pretty decent. Scrying is already pretty strong, especially in limited, and it will filter you, through those lands late game and things like that, and it's a decent sink. 3 mana is, again, a little expensive, but not too bad to get that scry 1 ability that's pretty relevant. So this guy seems fine. He's also an artifact, so he's going to work with your improvise and things like that. He doesn't tap or anything, so pretty cool in that regard. Don't have any problems with him. Again, it's not going to make me play blue by any means, but if I'm in blue and I need a creature or I need that filter, he's there. After that, we have Gonti's Machinations. This is a enchantment for 1 black, another 1-drop. Whenever you lose life for the first time each turn, you get an energy. And you can pay 2 energy, sacrifice it, and each opponent loses 3 life, and you gain life equal to the life lost. Obviously better, once again, in multiplayer, 2-headed giant, things like that. As is, obviously we're primarily going to be playing 1-on-1, and in that regard, it's not that good. It's essentially 1 mana situational lightning bolt, only hit players. It's really limited in what it does. A 3 life swing both ways is good and limited, but I'm not amazed by this. If you have some way to maybe recur this over and over, maybe you've got a couple of those guys that return enchantments, I believe, from your deck grave to hand, and you can reliably keep blinking those or something. In black-white value, I can see that really having a purpose. But also another thing, the fact that when you lose life, you gain energy. Obviously, you don't want to be losing life, so, it's just weird. Maybe combine this with, those guys, the Aetherborn that, you lose life and draw a card, you can do that. But overall, I'm not a big fan of this card. It just doesn't do enough for what it's asking, and I don't think I would play this. I don't think I would play this at all. Only if I was in black-white value with the ability to really, really recur it. Next up, we have Verdant Automaton. So this is a 1/2 for 2, and its ability is to pay 3 and a green, and you put +1 counter on it. So as a 1/2 for 2, it's under the curve, especially in green. But the ability to put the +1 counter can be really relevant, especially if you have that green X deck going on where you're wanting counters and getting triggers from counters and things like that. So I don't have a problem with this guy. If you're in that deck, this is definitely a filler card to use. And he does have that growth potential. He will eventually be relevant in his body size. 2/3, that's going to be essentially a 2/3 for 6. Is definitely not worth it alone. So it really is going to rely upon either wanting to go really late game and be this something that gets through eventually, or just wanting to get the counter shenanigans going, which I believe is where this card is primarily going to be played, if it's played at all. After that, we have the Aegis Automaton. So now this is a 2-drop 0/3. And it has the ability to pay 4 and a white and return a creature you control to your hand. So a 0/3 is, it's going to block a few things, but there's so many 3/2s in this set, at the 2-drop slot especially, 3-drop slot. It's not really going to get through that much. Mostly, in all honesty, this is going to be blocking a couple, 1 servo each turn, so it's not completely irrelevant, but it's nothing to write home about. It is an artifact, so it is going to work with your improvise and artifact matters cards. And again, this is one of those sinks for late game. If you do get to that ability where you're having 5+ mana, he is an infinite blocker. You can play him, and if you have 7 mana, he's an infinite blocker because you can just play him back, block with him, return him, play him back. He does allow you to trigger Revolt by bouncing things, but again, it's just a huge mana requirement. 5 mana is a lot. and I'm not sure that's even worth it in those situations because Kaladesh is such a fast format. But if you are trying to do that stally game, you know, he can definitely do some interesting things for you with saving your creatures and triggering ETBs again and Revolt. See, there's just a lot of things that he enables. So I think he's a good card, and I think he'll see quite a bit of play. Next up, we have Ironclad Revolutionary. This is a 4/4 for 6, and his ability is that when he enters the battlefield, you can sack an artifact. If you do, he gets 2 +1 counters, and each opponent loses 2 life. Seen a lot of good two-headed giant cards today. So now he does require you to be in an artifact deck, which in this format, you know, you're probably going to have something to sack. And a 6/6 for 6 is not bad. You know, he's not aggressively costed by any means, and he does have that little bit of a life drain. But overall, I'm not super impressed with this guy. I wish he did the, you know, they lose 2, you gain 2, and I would value him slightly higher. But as is, you know, he's just a big, beefy curve topper. And that's it. You know, he's there if you need that 6-drop. But honestly, I don't really think... I know Kaladesh Limited wasn't really worth going up to the 6-drop usually. And so I'm not sure if Aether Revolt Limited will be either. But if you decide that's where you want to go, he's there to do that. Next up, we have Servo Schematic. So this is a artifact for 2. And it has whenever it enters the battlefield or is put into the graveyard, you get a 1/1 servo. So it's kind of like the white Puzzle Knot, you know, 2 mana, you get a servo, but it doesn't require any additional mana. I don't really have any problems with this. It's going to go good, especially if you have a, you know, say for example, you're wanting to improvise something. This is free because you're going to pay this, you get a servo, that's 2 artifacts, you can tap both those for 2 mana and play your improvise spell. And I think that's where the card is primarily designed to function. And it seems really good in that. You know, the fact that you also get one when it dies gives you that replacement for it, and it just does a lot. Outside of Improvise, I don't think it's super good, but, you know, it does give you blockers, it gives you artifact matters, it gives you 2 artifact ATB triggers. Like, there's just a very versatile card that's going to do a lot for you. So I think this card has some high playability in a variety of decks, but it's not necessarily going to be the best card in every deck. After this, we have Perilous Predicament. This is an instant for 4 and a black, and each opponent sacrifices an artifact creature and a non-artifact creature. So this is 2 removal spells for 5 mana at instant speed, which is pretty odd. You know, this looks like a card that would be a sorcery. So considering this is an instant, it seems pretty strong. You know, you are getting a 2-for-1 deal pretty much no matter what in this format. You know, most people are going to have an artifact and a non-artifact. And this just seems really good. You know, this can set up some amazing combat shenanigans. This can set up, you know, complete board wipes. I mean, there's just so many things this is going to do for you. So I definitely think this is very, very, very good card in limited format here. And I think it'll be high pick too. You know, it's that's a good removal spell. That's what we like to see. You know, value in a card, and this has it. So I don't really have any complaints here. You know, it's good cost for what it does, and it seems like a good card. Next up is Reservoir Walker. This is a 3/3 for 5, and whenever it enters the battlefield, you gain 3 life and get 3 energy. It's a little undercosted, or overcosted rather, at being a 3/3 for 5. You know, life gain can be relevant, energy can be relevant. This is definitely a filler card. You know, this is nothing that you want to play. It's just there if you need that energy, if you need a creature, something like that. So it's going to fit in where it fits in, and that's all there is to say. Next up is Renegades Gateway. This is an instant for 2 and a black. You give a permanent indestructible, and you create a servo. Seems like a decent card. I would still say that the one from Kaladesh, where you give it +1/+0 and indestructible, and lifelink is better. But you know, this is any permanent you can do, so you can definitely save, you know, anything. You know, maybe you want to save your amazing artifact you got. Maybe you want to save your planeswalker. I mean, there's a lot of different things you can do with this, and you get a servo for whatever reason. So I don't really have a problem with this at all. I like it. I like the card, and I think it's playable, but I don't think it's the best card in its slot. There are better combat tricks out there. Next up is Prizefighter Construct. This is a 6/2 for 5, and that's it. Again, this is a curved topper. 6/2 is pretty bad in this format, so I don't think this is very playable. And I really don't have much more to say about it. It's not very good in Kaladesh Limited, I don't believe. It's Gonna allow you to maybe push through, but it's going to get so easily chumped and so easily traded with. It's just, I don't like this card very much. Next up is Resourceful Return. This is a sorcery for 1 of the black. You return a creature from your grave to hand, and if you control an artifact, you draw a card. In this format, you're going to control an artifact pretty much all the time, so I think it's safe to say this is basically return a creature from your grave to hand and draw a card. And that's decent. It can get back a lot of things. And if you do have, specifically a couple creatures that you really want to be playing and keeping around and things like that, this definitely goes up. It's not a must-play, but it's there, if you need it to do what it does. And nothing special, pretty average. The cantrip makes it playable more so than most cards like this. So, again, it's there if you need it, but nothing amazing. Next up is Augmenting Automaton. This is a 1/1 for 1, another 1-drop. And its ability is just to pay 2 and get +1/+1. We haven't really seen much of the black fire breathing recently, so that's pretty cool to see return finally. And it's a great sync for that late game. If you have 6 mana, you can make it a 4/4 for, essentially 1. And that just seems pretty good. I don't think there's anything amazing, but I think it's probably one of the best of the automaton line. You can drop it on turn 1 and it's relevant, and then it just gets better as you go throughout the game. So overall, a solid little artifact card, and I would probably play it if I was in black. There are possibly other better options, but I don't have any complaints here. He seems to do what he's meant to do, and that's to be a sync. After that, we have Night Market Guard. This is an artifact for 3, and it's a 3/1, but it can block an additional creature. 3/1 is nothing special. That's going to trade to a servo most likely, but obviously this is a defensive card. You do get 2 blocks out of it, so that's pretty cool. I don't think it's amazing by any means. I think if you're on a super defensive play, maybe you can play this, but ultimately it just seems mediocre at best. Nothing really more to say here. It does what it does, and it'll probably be somewhat relevant and somewhat useless, just depending on each individual game state. After that, we have Sly Requisitioner. This is a 2/2 for 5 with Improvise, and whenever a non-token artifact you control is put into the graveyard, you get a servo. So this card seems pretty decent. It's definitely overcosted for its power at its base cost, so you really don't want to be dropping this for 5. But if you're in that improvised deck and you can drop it for 3 or less, I would say it's definitely good. That seems like the line of these improvised cards is generally if you have at least 2 artifacts, you're getting your worth out of it, and that holds true for this too. Its build is pretty cool. If you have a super heavy artifact deck, anytime you lose one, you're getting a servo. And if you have the ability, maybe you're playing some of the ones that can sack off, like Renegade Map or some Puzzle Knots and things like that. Seems like it goes up in value. I don't think it's a must-play by any means, but it's going to fit really well into that deck that wants it. And that's about all it's going to do. After that, we have Mobile Garrison. This is a vehicle for 3, and it is a 3/4 once it is crewed, and it's crew 2. So this is a pretty interesting vehicle. A 3/4 for 3 is nothing super special. Crew 2 is not too bad, but not the best. But whenever it attacks, you get to untap another artifact or creature, so it can essentially become a quote-unquote free crew. It does, keep that creature out of combat that turn, so it's not totally free, but it can kind of give that vigilancy feel to it. If you attack with a 3rd creature, there's just some different options. It works really well if you have like the cards that are like when they become tapped, you do abilities, because you can essentially do those twice per turn. You can drain your opponent for 1, gain 1 twice, and that's really relevant. And that's where this card seems to be pretty cool. Ultimately, I don't think it's anything special, but if I had one of those cards that's going to let me quote-unquote abuse this card would go up in playability then. Or if you're just wanting a vehicle, it is one of the cheaper vehicles at common. It's no Renegade Freighter, but it's there if you are wanting a vehicle or wanting something to do like what this can do. And another application would also be if you have a really good tap artifact ability, you get to reuse that, of course, too. Next up, we have Barricade Breaker. This is a 7/5 for 7, an artifact creature with Improvise, and he has to attack. I think this card's pretty decent. A 7/5 for 7 is not the worst, so I would say anything below its additional cost is good. And it is, where he is an artifact with Improvise, he does kind of have that full-on Mirrodin ability. Artifacts are cheaper, so he seems really good in that regard. There's not many artifacts that actually have Improvise themselves, because, you know, that could potentially be broken at that point. But ultimately, you know, this guy seems pretty strong. You know, he's your curved topper. He's a big, beefy body, and, you know, no complaints here. He seems aggressively costed, and he seems like he'll definitely be relevant to break through clog boards and things like that. So, ultimately, I think this is a pretty solid card, and I would probably play it. After that, we have Ironclad Crusher. This is another vehicle, and it's just simply a 6/6 for Crew 3. And this is probably one of the weaker vehicles we've seen. 6/6 is kind of mediocre for a vehicle, honestly. I mean, it can block a freighter or something, but Crew 3 is just asking so much. I don't think this card is... I think it's just on the verge of being unplayable because of its costing and such. So, unfortunately, I can't give this one full credit for that. I think this is overall a bad vehicle. Maybe I'm undervaluing it, but I definitely don't see it having much playability. Next up, we have Consulate Turret. This is an artifact for 3, and you can just tap it to get an energy, or you can tap it and pay 3 energy to deal 2 to a player only. Now, if this hit creatures, I would say it was awesome, but only hitting players, it definitely limits it. It does give you at least an energy per turn, so if you're in the deck that wants this recurable energy, that seems decent. And the ability, you know, just to tap to have that potential win condition is pretty decent also. Definitely requires an energy commitment deck, otherwise completely useless. So overall, I say this card is one of those that's hit or miss. If you have a super crazy energy deck and you're just wanting to go crazy with it, you know, maybe this has a place. It's too slow probably for red-green energy, so maybe this is one of those like blue energy cards, you know, you have it with Aether Squall, and you're getting 3 energy a turn, just immediately spending it to deal 2 each turn or something. I mean, there are applications for this, but again, you know, it's not going to pull me into playing energy just because I have this card by any means. Next up, we have Crackdown Construct. This is a 2/2 for 4, and whenever you activate an ability of an artifact or creature that isn't a mana ability, it gets +1/+1 till the end of turn. This is obviously a combo card. You know, you combo it off with Fumarole, you know, becomes a 1/4, and you just blink it back and forth infinitely, and voila, you have an infinite power creature. So it's definitely a constructed combo card here, and not much more than that really. In limited, I don't think there's going to be any 0 cost ones. If you do have a 0 cost ability, then this is awesome, but I can't remember any off the top of my head in Aether Revolt. And if you're having to pay mana, you know, it's not the worst card ever. It's really a card that requires either build around me or just to have a bunch of other cards that can abuse it to make it good. If you have one that's maybe, you know, a free tap ability, he becomes a 3/3 for 4, and that's not the worst. So he definitely has some uses. Definitely a constructed card, but he's not the worst thing in limited, and he does fit in any deck, of course, being colorless. Any deck that has abilities makes him, you know, where he's actually going to be decent. Next up, we have Daredevil Dragster. This is a vehicle for 3, it crews for 2, and it's a 4/4. And at the end of combat, if it attacked or blocked, you put a counter on it. And then if it has 2 or more counters on it, you sack it and draw 2 cards. So this has quite a bit going on with it. So a 4/4 vehicle for 3 is pretty average, I would say. And then a crew 2 is not too bad. And then the ability that it does after a while replace itself with 2 cards seems pretty good. There are also ways to get those counters on it faster, like if you have the snake, you know, black and a green, you know, this immediately becomes a 3 mana, next turn attack with a 4/4 and draw 2 cards, and that seems pretty strong. Overall, I don't think this is a bad card. I don't think it necessarily fits in every deck. But I think that it definitely has its place and its role, and I would probably be pretty happy playing this just because of the drawing 2 cards. So. This card is one that's kind of hard to evaluate because I really want to see it in action to see how relevant it is. Because, you know, if you draw 2 lands, well, you just lost your creature, and that's not an option, so I don't know. It seems pretty good, seems pretty aggressively costed, so I think this is a high you know, a medium high level card, but maybe I'm overvaluing this one. And our last and final card of Aether Revolt spoiler discussion is Filigree Prowler. This is a 2/2 for 4, and when it dies, you get a Thopter. 2/2 for 4 is mediocre, but the fact it creates a flyer when it dies is pretty cool. It's not the best card ever, but this is definitely a decent filler card if you really need it to be there. I wish it didn't cost 4 because 4 has a lot of good stuff in this set. So it's probably going to be one of those cards that is almost played but gets cut. And if that's what it is, that's what it is. It may make a Thopter, which could be relevant for some decks, so that's what it is. Overall, it's just a simple little filler card and nothing more. And ultimately, that does bring us to Aether Revolt in a whole. You know, we have looked over the full entire set, and there is definitely some awesome stuff for limited, and I think the whole limited environment is just going to be really, really fun, really, really creative. There's just going to be some flashy plays, and I just anticipate this to be a blast. So, again, you know, I highly encourage all of you guys to go out and go to a pre-release. It's some of the most fun you could ever have in Magic, and I stand by that. Pre-releases are just awesome. You know, everybody's on an equal playing field for the most part. You just have so many deck building options a lot of times, and it's just, there's just so many aspects of it that are just awesome. There are some cards that I'm definitely hoping to pull here. And some cards that I'm sure I've misevaluated throughout the list here. So if you guys disagree with what I say and have said in these videos, definitely leave that feedback. And if you think I've hit it spot on, definitely let me know, because I like to have that encouragement also. So any feedback is appreciated as always. Likes and subscribes and all that, as always, are something that I'm not going to beg for, but hey, if you want to give it, then I do much appreciate that. So this does once again bring us right to the end. So I do thank you guys for tuning in. And as always, this is TheBeardedFool, and I'm signing off. I will catch you guys next time.